I'm delighted to have you here this morning, and I want to start by sharing a story with you about Mario, who, when he was 3 years old, the German troops took his mother away to a concentration camp. He was born in Italy, and she opposed the fascists, and so she was taken away. And she left some money for a neighbor to take care of him, and he quickly used up all that money, and this child at age 4 found himself on the streets. And over a period of years, till he was about 7 or 8, he was on the streets and was picked up by some local folks, authorities, because he had typhoid. And he ended up in a hospital at the age of 8, having a crust of bread a day and a cup of coffee, chicory coffee, once a day, until he was about 9. And miraculously, the war was over and his mother found him. She got out of the concentration camp and she found him. And she took him to America. And in America, he went to school, and because he was a very good student, he ended up going to a top university, Harvard University, and graduated. And his focus was in molecular biology. Well, at the age of 29, he graduated from Harvard, and he went on to continue with his work. And when he was 43 years old, he applied to the National Institutes of Health for them to support a project of his in biomedical research. In fact, he had 3 projects. They thought that 2 were terrific, and 1 was a stupid idea. And so they funded him for the 2. And they actually said, they didn't use the word stupid, but in effect they said that it was a really wildly speculative and improbable idea. So he took the money from the research for the 2 projects and he invested it all in his 3rd project. You know by now that Mario was not somebody to take no for an answer. If he survived what he survived, the National Institutes of Health was not going to be the place that told him he couldn't do his work. And he poured his heart and soul into this project. And a number of years later, when he was 70 years old, he got the Nobel Prize for Medicine. He shared it, and his name is Mario Carpacci. I want to tell you another story about a fellow by the name of Jack, who was a lousy student, opposite of Mario, really a lousy student. In fact, virtually every school kicked him out. And the way in which he learned English, since he didn't live in an English-speaking country, was he would volunteer to help tourists find things, and he would pick up English that way. And so he worked as a free guide. And years later, he tried to get into various colleges, and they all turned him down. Not undeterred by that experience, he decided to set up an e-commerce business, and he couldn't find any investors to do that. Eventually, after trying and trying and trying, a Japanese bank provided him with $20 million. And today, he's turned that $20 million into $75 billion. And that's Jack Ma's Alibaba, who serves 600 million customers in 240 countries. Third story I want to share with you is about Maritza, who was born in the Peruvian jungle in the Amazon, in an indigenous community called Nomatzigenga. And if I said that wrong, sorry. Violence scarred the countryside because of the war between the oppressive government and the Shining Path, and other groups were described as terrorist groups in an attempt to overthrow the government. And there was terrible, terrible violence. Maritza found her community, among others, to be caught in the middle of all of this, and all of their customs and the ways in which they lived their lives, the things that were important to them, their local culture, were kind of thrown by the wayside. And she found as a young girl and as a woman that nobody paid attention to her. So her desire to protect her culture and her community was disregarded. Maritza decided that this was not okay, and that she worked through a Catholic health association, Catholic Relief Services, and decided that through them she was going to try and see if she could rebuild her community. And she said that that work helped her to become more knowledgeable and more fearless and more comfortable in her own skin, even in the presence of other leaders and authority figures, especially men. Maritza Rodriguez said, and I'm quoting, "Women need to lose their fear and dare to participate and gain experience as leaders. if they do, Maritza believes that her young daughter can live in a different world. So what is it about these three people? Obviously, I picked people who went on to succeed in the universes that they inhabited and did very well at it. Not everybody does. But what is it about people who face defeat and face some kind of a struggle and yet find a way through it and don't allow that defeat to prevent them from achieving what they're doing? How is it that they don't lose hope? I think that, and one other question that I want to ask, we've deliberately invited people from very different communities to talk to us because we think that culture and gender and history and all kinds of mores within different communities affect the way in which we cope with defeat as well, so that there are all kinds of layers. And I'm going to ask 4 extraordinary people to join me today to talk about these things. And I'm first going to talk to Ned. Ned Breslin, Water for People.
Hi.
And hi. And Ned, I wanted to ask you, you've just had, I guess what would be described as a rough childhood, a life that wasn't easy and one that you could walk through and breeze into the future. Mm-hmm. What was it that helped you to succeed notwithstanding that?
So if you came by my house as a child, or when I was a child, you'd see a mom and a dad and a St. Bernard and 5 kids, and my dad was the mayor of a town and Little League baseball coach, and he was the first person who greeted you at church. But my parents were amazing drinkers, and when the vodka flowed particularly strong, my father would either, he would scream at me, or he would beat me, or he would rape me. And for most of my childhood, I did not know going into my house which of these or which combination of these was in store for me that night. When I went through a particularly bad period in Potomac where the rape was particularly dramatic, and I used to go into my closet and hide behind my comic books. And I would imagine Captain America and Iron Man, standing in front of the door, shield up, protecting me. And that's when I started to imagine new worlds. That's when I started to imagine that there was something possibly better. A lot of people talk about resilience and all of that. At the time, it was survival. But I learned things during that time that have served me well and have been really powerful as I've moved forward in my life. I tend to operate in gray, in confusion very well. I tend to see through things and see pathways through that might be risky, but I'll take them because I had to. I learned to rely on unusual allies, people that you wouldn't normally think of, and so I tend to see things in people and beauty in people that maybe they don't even see sometimes themselves. And over time, I learned that the desire for a better world, a peaceful world where children can thrive and live and not be afraid to go home was something that would drive me tirelessly.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I know these aren't easy questions.
Sure.
And in your work, I'm sure that you've had challenges as well, but
Sure.
of a very different kind. But nevertheless, sometimes when one's in a place where one feels close to suffocated,
Sure.
those feelings come back again. How do you overcome those kinds of things at work?
Well, a lot of people talk about fear and fearlessness and all of that. I think fear. I learned very early that there's this whole thing about fight and flight, right? So you either fight or you fly or you disengage. I mean, I disassociated a lot as a kid. But I've learned in organizations in particular that the moment of greatest fear, if you can calm yourself, if you can kind of see through the fear, there's actually great opportunity and great creativity that can come from that. And again, as a child, some of my most interesting solutions to this particular problem came at the point of greatest fear. And so I like to believe that there are moments in organizational histories and in the work that we do where fear can dominate and you can freeze and step back and go safe. Whereas I tend to be, and it's not easy for staff, but I tend to, in that moment of fear, want to step forward and say, well, what are the options out there, and how can I use some of those skills I learned as a child surviving to do something beautiful, to do something really great. And I like working in organizations where people can stand in fear and see beauty and pathways forward, because I think that's when, we talk about disruption and we talk about kind of new ways of doing things. I think that's where it often comes from. If you don't fight, if you don't flee, if you don't freeze, but if you embrace and hold that moment and go.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
We'll continue this discussion in a minute. Kennedy. Kennedy is founder and CEO of Shining Hope Communities in Kenya. And as an internationally recognized human rights activist, you've fought extreme poverty, you've dealt with some of the biggest issues, gender inequality, HIV, AIDS, and so on. I would say that some of the toughest challenges in our environment and in a community where the resources are somewhat limited. Just yesterday, since I grew up in South Africa, I know about some communities like the ones that Kennedy works in. And so the first question I asked him is, do you have any hot and cold running water? Hot water, no. Cold water. I mean, we're talking about resources where people have to go down the road, where there's one tap, people stand in line. So you've really been working in some of the most challenging circumstances. Was there a time when you felt this was just too difficult, that you wanted to go and hide?
Yes, of course. So I said, thank you so much for opportunity. I started facing hard life from a very, very early age. And as a kid, I was confused. I didn't know what's going on. My mother had me at the age of 15 in a very, very difficult environment. So, and we had what's called the abuse in the house, fight because of poverty. So at the age of 10, I ran away and I became a homeless kid. And I think that's a way of giving up in life. So I was into drugs. I did some horrible things, stealing, Yeah, it was really, really time that you felt like you don't care. When you don't care in your life, you can do anything because you don't have what's called hope.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what happened? Can you tell us how you moved from that to...
So what happened in life, everything we have to learn, we don't have answers. But what I realized in my life is how to surrender, how to step back and observe. And what really gives me a lot of hope is what we call believing in humanity. Knowing that after I was hungry for no food, I have been looked down upon, I was very poor, I was insecure. And then you realize that what remains is humanity, human being. People will be around you for who you are. People will be around you for your wealth. And knowing that anything can go anytime. And how do you find peace among yourself? So for me, it has been a way of grounding myself, knowing that anything can happen. And in that way, I've been able to be strong and to learn that what only matters in life are small things. Family, your children, your wife, your husband. Everything else is secondary. And everything else can go away anytime. But if you're not able to learn from experience, you can't stand it. So for me, I feel very, very strong in terms of, I call Kibera, the slum, a university of life because of the struggle I've passed. And I tell everybody in my community, like, you know what, guys? We are passing through this university of life.
Kennedy, was there a time when you were on the streets where there was somebody, somewhere, someplace, some person that gave you that hope, or was it all coming from inside?
Yes. I think in life, you pass through what's called process of reasoning, process of finding yourself. And at that moment, I got so lucky when I was given a book of autobiography of Martin Luther King Jr. For me, that was the beginning of a journey of hope. And I saw a lot of horrible. I remember one of my friends, when I was 12, was killed by mob justice. He stole something on the street. And seeing him dying was something really I'll never forget. It was really horrible. You know what I mean? And I knew there is no way out. Reading that book of Martin Luther King Jr. gave me a process of hope that no matter what, you can make it.
Thank you. Well, we're going to continue this conversation. If you wouldn't mind joining Ned for now, but we will get there. Cecilia.
Yes.
I'm delighted that you're here with us. And when I read a little bit about your background, Cecilia is the president of Flores-Oebanda, is the president of the Social Forum Foundation, if I said that correctly. When I read a little bit about your background, I learned that not only had you been a child laborer, but that you then started working in that area and there was a crackdown and you found yourself in prison and separated from your own child.
Yeah.
How did you cope?
Well, I'm here, still alive.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, but actually, it's like a torture every day, because it's not only that I'm separated with my eldest son. I was in prison for 4 years with my 2 children and my husband. So it's quite difficult to see all your family in prison and separated to your another child. But during the time, it's the dark time, really, in the Philippines society, because it's under Marcos regime and it's in martial law. So for me, I just feel that, well, it's okay. I'm with my family, although that you're in prison, and I would say that that's really a very dark place for a child to raise. What keeps me going there is that I believe the time will come that the dictator will topple and we're going out of prison. But still, my children grow up and asking a lot of questions. So I try to carry my child in the tree that we planted in prison and show them that there are other, world outside those 4 walls. And the problem is that the more that you explain that there are world outside, the more they ask more questions. So it's a challenge. So yeah, it keeps me dream the day that we're going out of that prison, and the belief that someday we topple the dictators and my children will not endure what I endure, not have to sacrifice what I sacrifice, and the whole Filipino people will enjoy democracy. And we did after 4 years.
Well, you came out and you didn't shrink back. You remind me of some of the parts, Ned, that you described about yourself, about hope and so on, in the face of this huge barrier in front of your face. But you came out and you didn't shrink back. You started working, or you continued to work in human trafficking.
Yeah.
Now, I would imagine that in that situation, the kinds of stories that you hear from people every day, every week, every month, every year, are enough to also make you feel sometimes discouraged, particularly when the systems that surround human trafficking are so profound and are invested with so much money. How have you managed to cope during these times?
Well, first, I see our life. Before, when we get out of prison, I thought that our life in prison is the worst life that anybody can endure. But after I work and serve women and children actually trafficked, I realized that our life is really nothing compared to what they endure. Personally, I'm a very stubborn person. I don't run in a fight. How big or small is that? That bring me to a lot of trouble. But fighting traffickers, slave traders is a game of injuries. You need to endure all this, all these problems and things that you see, and I need inspiration. I keep myself inspired by the children and women that I serve. They keep me going. They are like air that I breathe, And every time that I'm with them, I'm energized. I make myself more proactive and strategic in all my doings, because I need to lobby, or I need to gather troops of partners to support our fight, or else I'm alone there and the trafficker can easily kill you. So you have really to gather your supporter. I'm also know that I have my own weaknesses. I'm very honest to myself. and I know what I'm capable with and not capable, you know. That's important and makes me more, you know, humble and grounded, you know. At the same time, I've always focused on the bigger goal of freedom, that the day will come that the Filipino children, men or women, are free to explore opportunity without the risk of being sold and enslaved. And that's me, keeps me going.
Oh my God, thank you, thank you. Have a seat. Lola, straight from the House of Lords. I promised I wouldn't say that, but I'm just saying. Could you share with us a little bit about yourself and how you have faced challenges in your life?
Yes, but I do want to say really heartfelt to salute my fellow panelists, because you know, hardship, obviously it's a relative thing, but in terms of the very real physical conditions, adverse conditions that my fellow panelists have endured, I had it relatively easy. All I would say in mitigation, as it were, is that what happened to me was that my parents, who were from Nigeria, both came to study. That's such a long, convoluted story, but they both went to study in London, and they weren't married. I was born, and they kind of, at 8 weeks, I was given away to an elderly white foster mother. So, who wasn't very rich, didn't have much money, was receiving no money from the state in those days. 50s, 60s London, lots of very visible and obvious racism, including being spat at and abused in the street and on the way to and from school. You know, teachers would use terms like darky and all the rest of it. So it was a kind of very different educational environment to that which we have today. And then when that foster mother died, I went into children's homes, various children's homes, and it was all a bit of a disaster emotionally and for me academically. But another point that I'd pick up on from my fellow panelists is this thing about reading, escaping into the world of books, imagining I was one of the famous five, having great adventures, climbing trees and doing all the things that I would fantasize about doing. And that sort of, it does show there's a world outside. What you're going through isn't the only thing that happens to people. So yeah, it was, I think I would say, to sum that up, it was a sort of combination of racism and a profound sense of loss and abandonment that I grew up with, and it was dealing with that became my kind of thing.
The only response that I have to what you've said about what happened to you wasn't as profound is that everybody's experience is profound for them.
Yeah, no, it's
and
all relative,
since they don't know, and today isn't about one more profound experience than another. It's what are the adversities. But so in that regard, how does one find one's way out of that?
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I mean, for me, no family, so friends were really, really important, and that sort of craving for loyal friends. And sometimes I kind of adopted parents, as it were. So I didn't tell them, of course, but I thought, I'll have that person's mother and that person's father and that person's uncle and auntie and things like that. And but really I sort of felt, well, if this is the way it's going to be, then I'm just going to have to be really independent and strong. In children's homes, still in this country, when you're 18, that's it, out you go, almost on the stroke of midnight of your birthday. And it's like, so what was I going to do? Where was I going to go? 18-year-old in London with no family. And so it's kind of finding my way through that. You do have to call on these huge reserves and build something up for yourself that other people you fantasize about have things done for them. And I tell you, there's a whole lot of fantasy in that life, because I know, of course I know now, that behind those doors of those seemingly very settled and wonderful middle-class families that I envied so much, there was so much stuff going on that actually in lots of ways I was probably better off where I was in some kind of senses. So it's kind of pulling on yourselves, but also friends, imagination, hope, of course.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
Please.
I'm just to take this to a different kind of a place for a moment. I'll just share with you a very quick story of my own, in which I ran a domestic violence agency, and it was before in the United States there was any laws protecting people suffering from or facing abuse at the hands of a partner. And I got a phone call from the police, and in those days the police were not our friends. But I got a phone call from the police saying there's a woman in hospital and she's got a bullet through her head. She's about to go in for surgery because her son's going to be charged with murder, attempted murder. And I said, well, why are you calling me? We're dealing with domestic violence, and usually we're talking about battered women or that kind of situation. And he said, just go in and talk to her and you'll see. Turns out that this woman had a boyfriend. She was earning very well for herself and her 2 children. This is easily 20 years ago, and she was earning a very good salary. So the boyfriend was as a partnership, not for economic reasons. She had her own apartment. And she had 2 children, one 16 and one 10. And the boyfriend had been on some kind of a drinking spree or had become crazy and had arrived in the apartment and had threatened her that she was sleeping with someone else. And she said she wasn't, and he had a knife with him, and he said he was going to cut up all her clothing, and when he finished with cutting up her clothing, he was going to cut her up piece by piece. And this 10-year-old child heard this. While she was pleading with the boyfriend, the 10-year-old snuck into her bedroom and called his older brother and said, you have to come quickly because Lenny's going to kill mom and then me. I'm really scared. So the 16-year-old was with his friends, and he said, what do I do? And one of his friends had a sawed-off shotgun. And this 16-year-old took that gun, and he went to the apartment, and he went upstairs, and he aimed it at Lenny, the boyfriend. And the boyfriend turned to him with snide remarks, calling him a wimp and all kinds of insults, and said, come on, do it. And he did. He shot Lenny, but he missed. And it ricocheted off a pillar in the room, and the bullet went into his mother's brain. And he was being charged with attempted murder. Now, I found myself, when I was in the room, I found myself in a situation in which my job was to help this woman persuade her that she needed to tell the police the whole story, because if she didn't, her child would be facing attempted murder. And talk about being defeated. I just didn't know how to do it. Finally, I walked away and I came back maybe an hour or 2 later as she described the story, and I said to her, help me understand what Lenny does for you. Obviously, he's that important in your life that you are willing to sacrifice everything that you've built in your whole life for this man. And she began to describe to me what role Lenny played in her life, which was when he wasn't violent, which wasn't all the time. He was the only person she could count on who was a real adult, and so on. Now, we went back to our organization to talk about how do we deal with situations where what we think is right and wrong and what the person we're working with thinks is right and wrong are different, and where we think that the consequences for that person are going to be so great that if they don't make our decision the way we think they should, their lives were going to be impaired. So I can tell you that for a long time I felt quite defeated. I won't tell you the end of that story because that's really not the point. What I'd like to ask you all, though, what was the end of the story? Okay, I'll tell you quickly. The end of the story is that in the end she did press charges, but the way we got her to do that was we were able to arrange with the police that the son would be released from prison temporarily. She had enough money to have him out on bail, and he went to visit his mom. And when he described it, she then decided that she would press charges. So that's in fact how it happened. But it wasn't for a long time. There were weeks that went by before that happened. Are there any comments that you want to share with one another, or questions you want to ask one another based upon what you've heard from each other? Your life stories are just so different but so profound in themselves. And by the way, this session is going to be totally interactive. I hope that if you have a question, just raise your hand. Folks will give you the microphone. It's not just questions. If you have a comment, if you have a story you want to share, we want this to be a conversation with you as well.
Well, can I ask Ned
Lola,
something?
please.
Because when you were speaking, I felt kind of, real sort of empathy, even though I had a very different
Thank you.
kind of experience. And I wondered whether, you know, the extent... When I talk to people who've been in similar kinds of situations, who are now what we would call successful, how do you kind of carry that with you, that past, without it determining and completely sort of defining you? And when you do explain it to people, to what extent do they think, now that's what he's like, now I know why he's like that, and how, is to stop that being your sort of definition of who and what you are.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I like to believe I have a really rich and exciting story. I've had an amazing journey, and this is one part of it, and it put me on a particular path, but it's not my story. I own it. And I think the biggest thing for me was actually to forgive myself and to find that compassion and empathy first for myself, so that I could be a better person. And I don't talk about it all the time. I talk about it a little bit more now because it's such a big issue. I actually came out on this in the United States. There's a big case, Jerry Sandusky, Penn State football coach, 21 boys. And I was outraged. I had never spoken publicly about it, and I was outraged at myself because I was like, you know, these boys, these poor boys, they are so. The thing is, you're so alone, and that's the commonality between all of us. There's that moment of being alone, and everyone in this room has had that moment of being alone. And I was like, how dare you, with those boys being so alone, not speak out? And so I did, and I think some people will define me as that, but I don't, and most people don't. And you know, I just kind of charge ahead and imagine new worlds.
Any other thoughts from any of you? I have a question about change when there's a setback, and there's one person whose work I was reading who believes that the best way to change is evolutionary, in an evolutionary way, slowly going step by step. I think that there are lots of people who would argue that that's not the way to go. What do you think about evolution versus radical change to get out of the situation? And I don't just mean this personal circumstances you've described. I'm also talking about your work as you've gone forward as well.
Well, for me, the best teacher is actually a failure or a challenges, which actually fast track everything, because you are forced to make that kind of radical actions and decisions. At first, of course, if you are confronted with a crisis or a huge problem, the tendency is that you're confused, or you panic, you know. But I think in my case, 3 years ago, my 24-year hard work was actually being stained and challenged, and I never experienced so confused in my life. But I think we turned out stronger because of that, and we were able also to examine ourselves, and it turned out very well, because you were able to reconstruct things, you were able also to institutionalize resiliency in the organization and make yourself more aware of the situation happening around you. And I think it makes you a better person. And I don't think that if I just wait for the process, for the evolutions, where we are now, it takes so long for us really to be where we are now. But when I look back, I feel gratitude to what happened to us, because it's actually now surface what are really important, what are really needed in order for us to become stronger and resilient organizations and clear our more vision and prioritize things. I believe that radical change is actually shortcut or fast track that process. And what can I say? I think I'm better now. The organization are more stronger and more resilient. I have a board who are all solid and always watching my blind side, and friends who tells you really the real score and tell you, hey, you're almost crossing the line. No one will trying just to be polite and just to to tell you the things that you want to hear, but there are people now that surround you that tell you what is really the situation, and I appreciate that, and I'm grateful for that.
Great. Anybody else want to comment on that? We had a get together a little bit yesterday, and one of the things that came up in our conversation was about how different cultures, there are differences in cultures, that there are some cultures where admission of defeat is not acceptable, particularly for boys, for men. And of course, we women were arguing that our expressions of feelings, Kennedy, you know what's coming, our expressions of feelings were actually a marvelous outlet for us to be able to experience. But it's not just about gender, it's about culture. Any thoughts about that? And Ned, I know you've lived in other cultures as well, but Kennedy, why don't we start with you?
Before we go there, there's something I wanted to share.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Please, please.
So most of what I've learned in life experience has been tolerance. And what is the outcome? And I think what I've really got inspired by my panelists, it's normally the life you pass through, the environment turns you different. As a young boy at the age of 12, you see your friend being killed. What do you get from that? You see death is nothing. So you go out, you are ready to kill. There's no feeling. Because, so that's the effect is so huge. And honestly, I was really affected, to be honest with you. So in Kenya, growing up poor, and Islam is for me was, you are invisible. You are an object. You're not important. If you die, nothing. If a son or a daughter of a middle-class person died, it's news. Police come to investigate. But for us, we are useless. So what happened to me, I became having this kind of hatred towards the elite, towards the middle class. So that's what I got, that anger. And the question is, what happens? How do you turn that into something positive? So my organization, to be honest with you, came out from anger. We don't care about the government. We don't care about what? The elite. We're going to have a movement in this, So for me, I really love that whatever passed through the life has really built us to see the world differently. So now I don't really judge much. When I see people do things which are horrible, I don't like it. But I am able to understand why people do what they do. So that's something I wanted to share on how environment, how your life experience affect you for who you are. And how do you change it, And that's when something becomes more unique. When what you pass through, and you can still able to become somebody different. So,
just stay with that for a minute. But stay with that for a minute.
Yeah?
So you said that it was the anger that drove your direction. What drives you now? Is it still that same anger, or is it different?
Oh, now I love the elites. I love the middle class.
Especially all the funders in the room.
I'm good. Okay, it's okay. Anyway, yeah. So what drives me is the good in people. I see that, honestly, I see good in people. I see good in my community. So when I come to a place like this, I just want to learn. There's something that I really got, and I really surrendered in my life. I'm like surrendered, because I've seen the hard life, I've seen the beautiful life, and the only thing that affects my life is sometimes I don't care. I'm being honest. I'm not scared of the worst. I don't think that's a good thing. But I'm not always scared. I'm always prepared for the worst. And everything in my life is bonus. Being here, to be invited to speak here for me is bonus. I don't have to be here. You know what I mean? So that's our pen.
And one just last question in this line. when you see children who look like you did at the age that you were when you felt what you've described, what do you do? What do you think? What action do you take?
Yeah, so I think what we've done is that to see people want one thing in life. It's called hope. If you can give these kids hope. And right now, I looked at Martin Luther King Jr., who I never met. But I know in my community, people really love my story. And they try to be, because they know me, we grew up together. And I don't know how I made it that way, but it's something that people really resonate with it in my community. So when I see kids, children at the age of 10, 12, and I just talk to them, you see their face, they see that hope.
I think that's really important because when I think about the situation of children in care in the UK, the statistics are terrible in terms of ending up in prison, in mental health institutions, having all kinds of problems throughout their lives, and very often reproducing the same kinds of conditions for their own children later on. And in the end, it becomes a bit of a litany which says, you're never going to succeed because you've been in care. This is what's going to happen to you. You're going to end up in prison, you're going to end up mentally ill, your own kids will be taken into care. And although the statistics kind of bear that out, I sort of feel that it's really important to be able to say, but it's not inevitable. And I think, you know, what you were saying about, okay, you get to a point and your anger can go over there where you try and change things, you sort of can step back from your situation, reflect on it, or it goes over there and you just take out your anger on other people. And that's where we get a lot of problems with criminal justice system and so on and so forth. So I think that sort of thing, hope, I know we've used it several times and maybe we want to unpack that, but I think it's really important to be able to say this is not the end, this is not all you're about.
So what does hope mean? Go.
Well, I think a lot of people who've been in difficult circumstances, and again, I think everyone in this room can join, generally believe in something before they see, and they move towards that, and that's really exciting because, you know, people who've had troubles like the ones we've been discussing and have been that alone, really at times do amazing things. And I bristle because people talk about it all the time. They always talk about kind of, you know, if you were abused, then you're an abuser and all that. I get great strength from people who stop that chain, who break that cycle. Those people are amazing, and basically say, I will not do this anymore. I remember what it's like as a child being beaten and raped. I will not do that anymore, and I will stop that. And you know, I'm part of a men's survivor group, and all of us have stopped it. And we won't go down that path, and we're creating new futures because of that, because we believe that you don't have to exert your dominance and your power and your control through violence, and that your kid can thrive in different ways.
And then we talk about radical change. I think there's a moment in your life that's become radical. Like,
Yes.
I wanna, you know, I'm tired of my life. I wanna go this way. So radical first, then what we call evolution, which has become organic. So at that moment, you know, I'm like, I'm starting the organization, blah, 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 but I'm still mad with the society because the government really didn't care about us in the ghetto and the rich people. See, the radical change, but evolution starts, you know, organic. I'm starting to understand people. And that's when I'm like, people are scared of Kibera, they can't come, but they want to help, you know what I mean? So that become more evolution and organic.
I love that.
Process,
Absolutely
yeah.
love that. That's absolutely right. Is there's a ferocity that becomes the cadence of your walk, and it you know, evolution can go in many different directions, and I think a lot of people in the Skoll community and in this world are saying, I'm not going to let that evolutionary path continue. We're going to pivot over here. We're going to pivot hard, and we're going to set a new path.
Although in a way, what I'm hearing Kennedy say is that it's both and. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah,
either
and
or.
then that becomes the evolutionary
So
path.
that then
Absolutely.
becomes a new path.
Or they're at the same time almost. I mean, because
Yes.
I always think about votes for women, okay? And it's like, I've no doubt that over a span of time, women would eventually have gotten the vote.
Yeah.
But actually, you know, women and men chaining themselves to railings, throwing themselves under horses and so on. And you've got to fast forward that thing. You've got to kind of press that button that makes it happen,
I love that.
you know, almost in spite of itself. Otherwise it takes too long and people get too frustrated.
I love that.
Anybody from the audience want to comment or join this conversation? Just raise your hands and we'll do that. So microphones here, and there's one down here. You can just, okay. Please. And also tell us who you are.
My name is Odede. I'm a co-founder and CFO and strategist at a company called Sproxel. It's a social enterprise based in the US. My question for the panel at large is, all of you have expressed incredible statements of loneliness or isolation in your endeavors, and also of great empathy, both for each other but also for others. How do you think that's influenced your management style in your professional careers and how you relate to other people?
Great question. I'm the moderator. I don't have to answer.
Do you want us to say something?
Yes, please.
Okay. I think for me, I think it's hugely influential. Now I can sort of say that because I'm sort of, you know, at a certain stage in my career, and I think particularly around the empathy. So what I do in Parliament, for those of you who don't know our slightly strange parliamentary system, I'm in the unelected bit of the Houses of Parliament. So we've got pretty much free rein to take on issues and do as much or as little as you want to do. And I work with a lot of NGOs in anti-trafficking and against modern slavery, also children in care, criminal justice system and arts and culture and ethics and all kinds of different things. But that thing about that invisible, I think it was you, Kenzie, who talked about feeling invisible and marginalised. And I'm very, very aware, when I meet people, I feel like I can read that sometimes with people. And when people work with me, I like to make people feel as included as possible. I don't want anybody ever to think that I'm not listening or that nobody's going to listen to them because they haven't been to Oxford University or whatever it is. Do you know what I mean? So it's really, really important to me to have that sort of sense of being inclusion, of establishing inclusion, and also having empathy and learning how to read people, not to pigeonhole them, but to enable them and to help them to access things, because sometimes people disempower themselves, and I want them not to do that.
Can I do like a good and a bad, if you will? So we just had a person come and look at our work, and he described it as driven by forgiveness. He said, you know, it's an organization that will try things, and if it doesn't work, it's like, well, what would you do differently? And it's that kind of pivoting and swaying road that I love about the organization I work for, and I think it's been built largely on that. Try things, if it doesn't work, pivot, move, and forgive. I think the hardest thing for me, and I think the hardest thing for staff that I've had to moderate over time, is actually my extreme sense of urgency. I have a really deep sense of urgency, and sometimes that's good. Sometimes being urgent is really good. Sometimes it's not, and I've had to really work hard on understanding and getting feedback from key people on when my urgency is actually out of whack with what is in reality. And so I've had to really moderate my behavior on that.
Yeah, for me, I think the effect is that I have a very personalistic relationship to my people and to my staff, that sometimes actually management, professional relationships suffer, you know. So because the cause that you are fighting is about really people, you know, about saving others. And I don't know, in the back of my mind, I have always something that I want everybody secure, everybody, you know, protected, everybody is happy, things like that, psychology. But it has also its negative, you know, impact. And I think the lesson that I learned there is that try really to to invest in system, within the organization. You need to realize that an organization is not a family that you manage. You have accountability, you need more transparency, you need more structures, you need, so I think that's my realizations, and as of now, of the organization investing to that, and because only having a system and a very clear direction, very strong governments can weather whatever storm comes to the organization, because people can actually crack down when, like for example, this just 3 weeks ago before I come here, our shelter was actually attacked by the trafficker. And we just recently rescued 27 girls from a Muslim trafficker. We actually lock up them in the basement, and then when we bring them to the shelter, they destroy our gate and then take 16 of the girls, and of course we panic, and that's for me a time for really for people within the organization, what were show the resilience and strength of the organization. I just hired a psychologist during the time, a licensed psychologist, and I can see her face white. The next day she handled the resignation. But everybody, aside from her, everybody stands their ground, Everybody said, we're here, what do we want to do? So that's actually for me, we don't have that strong system, we don't have that strong commitment, I might lose people, because we've been crisis that I lost people. But this time I would say that, okay, this is the team that I've been looking for.
Kennedy, you wanted to say something?
You raise a very good question. I think in my staff and people, I'm much more insensitive person, very sensitive. And I really care about people's feelings so much, and I want to read that. But at the same time, the mark that the experience left on me is that I'm very, very much scared when people look down on me. So every time I feel I'm being degraded, it really triggers me a lot. And I also think it's been helping me a lot on how to deal with the donors relation. Our work is about fundraising, and sometimes I like what's called partnership. So I've been much more be able to know that donor also needs me. I also need them. So I believe in what's called partnership. So it's been something that I really took from my younger age, whereby I don't want to be degraded, seriously.
Can I ask a question on that? Because I absolutely identify with that. When you live in a system that is very hierarchical, you kind of do get that. But do you find that you can say to other people, don't feel like this, don't feel that you're kind of inferior in any way, but it's quite difficult to help yourself? Do you see what I mean? If a member of staff came to you...
No, I'm an African man. You know what I'm talking about? So that's a good point,
He's about to get himself in some deep water.
We're trying to make him cry.
We don't cry, African men.
We're trying to make you cry.
Men don't cry.
Men don't cry. This is what we said.
Men really don't cry.
Maybe that will bring us back to the cultural thing that we discussed before. Yeah, it's very, 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 very hard, to be honest with you. And as growing up in my community, whereby men are known to be strong, men, as I say, men don't cry, and it's really something that, so when you cry, it becomes a little bit of weakness, you know what I mean? So when you cry, you hide, you know what I mean? Yeah. But honestly, sometimes I feel a lot of pressure, to be honest. There's this pressure that you have to be strong, you know what I mean? And you can do ABC, and yet you're also suffering from it. So I can get that point. Yeah.
It's interesting. My children will tell you that for most of their life, they never saw me cry, ever. And I actually cried in front of them, and these are one of the things that triggers me, is when, if you remember Newtown, when the kid was shooting and all these children got killed, I cried, and I might, when teachers would jump in front and on top of their kids. And that was the first time I cried, and that they saw it, and they couldn't understand it. And it really was from this place of this kind of mama bear thing. Yeah, and people often wonder, like, aren't you upset with your dad and all that? I mean, of course I'm upset with my dad. I've always been more upset with my mother. My mother, her cocktail was rather amazing. She was able to watch it happen, walk away, and then clean my clothes the next day and tell me he's your father. And so I'm very emotional when people stand up for others selflessly. If you remember last year, just a quick story, I cried at the opening ceremony, and it was dark, so it was all cool. But I don't know if you remember Sally Osberg, after Malala. She came out on stage, and she was a mom right there. She spoke from so deep inside of herself, and she was speaking that this cannot happen to girls ever again. And I remember being in the balcony, and I was just tears coming down. It's when that happens, that's when I see real beauty and real power, and that's when, as a man, I can let down, frankly.
It's always felt to me that admitting defeat is a much safer place to be than someone else telling you defeated, because you can do something about it. If you're down, or if you are in a stuck place, it's so much easier to do something about it if you know it for yourself. Just one reaction to your comment or to your question, and then we'll go to the next one, is that for me it's the descriptions that people are expressing here, these four extraordinary people, is such a minuscule part of their lives. It may be a profoundly large part of certain part of your life, but if you look at the history of their accomplishments and the successes in their lives, the fact that they have been willing to step up and to dig deep, but that it's always true with these moments, sort of like the woman who I described with Lenny, where she described all these other times when she had, so that there is a whole reservoir of other skills that you have that help cope, I think, with some of those moments of isolation. But knowing you're not alone is one of the ways in which it's helpful. You wanted to make a comment or a question?
Yeah, hi, my name's Robert Bogard from Yazzie Foundation, Netherlands. It was more of a comment. I just wanted to say wow, because it's not your stories which are very profound, but there's probably millions of stories like them, but it's actually what you managed to make out of those stories, and it just had a profound effect. And you say men don't cry, but I was nearly in tears. But it's that inspiration that, you manage to overcome those situations that are, I think, a great help to others to show that, it's not the small defeats that should defeat you. And if you can overcome those sort of things that you guys overcame, then, we can all overcome pretty much everything that happens to us. So that was just a comment.
Thank you. Yes, there's someone here. Oh, there's a mic, and if you just pass your mic down. Okay. Yes. Tell us who you are.
You guys, okay, you can hear me. So you guys are doing this work.
Can you tell us who you are?
Oh, sorry. My name is Rashad Amato. I'm from Youth for USA, but based in the USA. So all of you guys are kind of directly working to break the cycle of the issues that kind of directly impact you, and I can honestly say that I'm still in that field. So I don't mean to sound redundant, but like, what are some ways that you guys cope with? I don't know if you deal with it, because even though I kind of get a high for the work and I feel like I'm making a change, there's still those moments when all of that darkness comes back and it triggers me, and I kind of check out and I'm isolated. And to be honest, it happens to me here a lot because this is a new environment for me, and I do kind of sometimes kind of check out, and I'm like, okay, snap out of it. So what are some ways that you guys cope when those deep feelings come back? That's the first question. And the second time is, how do you deal with coaching other people in their life, and I feel guilty a lot of times when I give advice, and it's like I'm still dealing with my issues. So sometimes I feel like a hypocrite, and are you really the right person to be doing this? So those are my two questions.
Okay. Cecilia? For me, I would admit that there are a lot of times that I feel that I'm in a very dark place, especially that if the situation is quite really desperate, fighting in the ground, you feel alone. And honestly speaking, there are times that your own spirit is also shattered, but you still need to be strong because there are others who actually, especially your colleagues, who expect you to be strong. Your family, your loved ones, that you need to be protected if you are under harassed and intimidated. So yeah, there are times also that you want to give up. But for me, sometimes what I do is that I go to the shelter. I spend time with the girls. The youngest in our shelter now is 1 year old, who is actually sold to cyber sex. We have a 5-year-old victim who is already lacerated. But you can, when I see them dance, laugh, and you see the life and the hope, it's energized me. It gives me, it reminds me of all the sacrifices also, not only of myself, but also the colleagues that I have, the people who believe in this fight, and the possible future that there will be, So, yeah. For another thing for me, I'm sorry, but I'm a Christian, so I always anchor on my faith, and I believe that God put me in this situation, and He will never despise me, So, and that keeps me whole. And again, I cry. I cry. In fact, I cry so hard. I mourn. No, I mourn because sometimes there are children that there is a child who actually under my care who dies. I mourn so hard. I cry so hard. No? But after that, you give up, continue the fight, and fight hard.
So I'm going to ask Kenneth, thank you. I'm going to ask Kennedy and Ned to see if you can respond in terms of the personal experience and being in progress, and do you have the right, and does he have the right? Just the things that he said and how it's still haunting him at this moment or in these times, something like that.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's a very good point you raised. I think it's not easy. For me, I say that it's a journey. Everything is a journey in our life, and we just have to, every day we are learning new things, and every day we make the progress that we have made in our life, you know what I mean? And that's something that really makes me happy, to see the progress. And let's not lie to ourselves, we can learn from other people. We all have something to give. So people come to me to talk to, I know we can share something and I learn from them. And for me, I find ways on how to make myself happy. It's very important. There are some of the music that I love, that when I hear them makes me, I want to shake my hips. And I like going to the hoods, running, those kind of, So you have to find that tipping point that when you do it, you feel more refreshed again, Mm-hmm. Some people do yoga, you know what I mean? Yeah. And then it's so hard to accept. But I think sometimes you have to accept what has happened to our life and move on. Mm-hmm. And as you said, we have to forgive ourselves. Yes. And never blame yourself. Mm-hmm. Surrender and then move on.
I think I loved your questions, and I actually find I'm very good now at noticing when I'm triggered. So when you mentioned the 1-year-old, I immediately started shaking. I know exactly when I'm triggered. I know how to ground myself very quickly and stay in the moment, and stay in that fear for a moment. And I think that's where interesting things happen. My stamina is ridiculous. I will not stop. And so I have really bad days, but I get up the next day and I do draw on that strength that as a kid I kept moving, and I seem to be able to do it as an adult. I don't feel like coach, to be perfectly honest. I feel like I accompany, and when I accompany people, I learn from them, and they guide me as much as I theoretically guide them. And I think that kind of relationship with individuals and with institutions, and because you can have that relationship with institutions as well, is extremely generous and two-way, and then you don't have to worry where you are in your process or in your healing journey, because we're all healing. We're actually all healing. And there's very few, who stop that process. So embrace where you are now. It's beautiful that you're even talking about it, and keep walking and walk with people.
Yeah, I endorse everything that everybody said, and I would add that I think you have to, well, not have to, but try and think of what it is extra that you bring to the table whenever you talk about the issues, whatever it is that you're dealing with, and however that relates to your situation. And I think that when you often, I'll speak to people and they'll say that about so-and-so that not only did he or she really understand where I'm coming from, but it's made me think differently. You may not always hear that. There's kind of a ripple effect. I'm sure you have a huge impact on people that you talk to and the people that you deal with who may be in similar situations or have that sort of relationship to what you've the kinds of things that you've experienced. And so you can sort of almost guarantee that you're inspiring somebody somewhere to do something a little bit different and to think a little bit differently. So I think you can acknowledge that within yourself. And again, when it comes to mentoring, guiding, accompanying, whatever you want to call it, I think for me it's really important to be honest and open about your vulnerabilities and where, because otherwise people will see you as this kind of superhuman person. And so, people say, Lola doesn't cry, never mind men, Lola wouldn't cry. She'd just get on with it, she's strong. And it's like, that isn't the entirety of my life. So I think being honest and open and prepared to expose not everything, but just that little bit of sense of you feel pain at times, because otherwise you're sort of denying it in others if you don't sort of acknowledge it in yourself somehow. Don't know.
Just one other thought on that. I saw a study for the last couple of years done with chief executive officers of the biggest corporate companies in the world, Fortune 50 companies. And they were asked a whole series of questions. And one of the questions that they were asked is, how did they rate their own competence? And over 70% of these people who are now in the top and the highest earners and all the rest of it, over 70% of them said that if people found out how inadequate they felt about themselves, they would probably lose their jobs. And so, in fact, even the most successful people in the world, even people who haven't had the profound experiences that each of the people on this panel have had, still feel inadequate from time to time or in circumstances. And so it's not an unusual thing. What's more unusual is to admit it and then to move with it. Was there anybody else? There's somebody in the back. That looks like Dorothy, but you need a microphone.
He's got a microphone there.
Oh, wait, we've got one here first, and then we'll get to you. Sorry, I just know her.
We've got two people.
Oh, two. Oh, 1, 2, and then you third. Sorry.
My name's Jason Payne.
Why don't we take all three so that we get to it, because we're short for time.
From a big data company by the name of Palantir. I have a very, very different question, which is, I'll argue that data on people that are down can be used to lift them up, but it can also be used and held against them. And the question is, how do we ensure that in a sort of big data world, we're using data to lift people up rather than defeat them?
Okay, that's question one. Second one.
Hi there, thank you. Barry Feinstein, Pritzker Foundation in San Francisco. Just interested to know all your situations happened at young age, and I'm interested to know whether or not is the strength DNA? It's a nature-nurture question, like where did you get this strength from, and do you reflect on the fact that it's just something that, because there might be other people in your same situation who are still on the streets who couldn't get their way, who couldn't figure it. And I'm just interested to know where you believe that comes from. Thank you.
And last comment or question?
With your permission, it's a comment, 2 comments. One is, I have something I say to myself which is helpful. I am obviously completely incompetent and totally inadequate to handle the challenges that reality has placed before me. But fortunately or unfortunately, I'm the best person available for the job. Very helpful. And the other one is about this crying thing. You know, I view the crying as our God-given healing process. It's what babies do when they're hurt. If we comfort them and hold them and they cry it all the way out, then they feel better and they go on about their business. We're the same, so as a social entrepreneur, I try to make sure to cry at least an hour a week. It's part of my systematic healing process. I get my husband to listen or somebody else, then he cries his hour, and then we go on about our business and keep changing the world, having cried.
Thank you. Thank you. Any comments for the two questions you asked? Terrific questions.
Yes, I think
Kenneth.
let me answer your try to answer your question. I think let's be, as you say about data, I love this. We can also be used against other people. You can see this thing happening in the States, whereby people living in the, in government support should be, why can they still living like that, So we should not confuse these things, I think there is circumstances and the environment that are part of it. There's nothing about special, I'm sorry, my life is like a tree falling on me, It can fall on anybody else, The way my life was growing up, there are a lot of things that happen on the journey. So it's all these dots put together that happens to make me who I am. Yeah, so that's a very, very good question. So I really feel like it's much more, everything is about circumstances that we are facing,
Any
Lola.
thoughts? Maybe we can ask each of you to comment. It's beginning with you, Ned, is going to Cecilia.
I look at it slightly differently. So 1 in 3 girls, 1 in 6 boys have been sexually abused. I mean, we're an army, right? We're an army that doesn't know it because we feel so alone. You're so alone and isolated. But as we start to realize we're an army, you get strength from that. And then I sit back and say, well, you know what? That moment of loneliness, everyone's had that. A father who was very loving passes away at a young age. All of a sudden, you're alone and confused. You lose something very valuable. That moment of loneliness actually binds us, and then we're all an army, and we can actually start turning around and seeing who are the people in the world who are alone right now, and how we will not let that happen. And that's where data, I think, is so powerful, is to sit back and say, people who have gone through, and everyone in this room's gone through it. There's nothing. You're right. My circumstances were mine, right? But that loneliness, that isolation, that abandonment, we've all felt. And if we can find ways to harness data and to show that when you overcome that, when you start to rise from that, and you're stronger and you're really powerful, we're a pretty good army. We're a pretty strong army, and that's the army that's going to radically shift our evolutionary path to something better, in my view. So we've got to find what binds us. We got to find those people who are down and out that you've given up on. They might be, the next rock star.
Cecilia.
Well, I believe that everybody has its own way of coping and strength or resilience really to face any adversity in life. I learned that actually from the victims and survivors that I help and serve. The degree of different experience is quite diverse, but you can see how they actually responds to that. And one important thing there is that there should be a ready individual, to listen and to understand, even you don't experience it or enjoy it, In this kind of service, you need really to prepare yourself because these are people, and as of now, we try to develop really something even for our girls to express their stories, how they tell their stories, because I saw it that it's really makes them stronger. and powerful. So like you, these stories, one girl, two girls, 11,000 girls become really an army of inspiring stories that can reach out to others and create the resilience and a coping mechanism that can maybe help them in their journey in life.
Lola, you get the last one.
Oh, thank you. And on this big data question, it's a really interesting one. I happen to think that science, the uses to which science and technology are put, reflect this kind of society in which they're developing and being developed. So you can use it for good things, you can use it for bad things. In my sort of current, some of the current work I'm doing in the criminal justice system and looking at the needs of vulnerable girls and women who need a range of services, what seems to be happening is that data, statistics, or whatever is used to fuel a risk-based analysis of their needs. So you tick all of these boxes and therefore you will be this and therefore this is the service you get, rather than thinking, here's an individual, what does she need? What does she, how does she articulate what she wants? So some of the work that we're doing at the moment is trying to turn that around. As to how you can use it in a positive way, I'd be interested to hear from you on that. And with regard to this thing, I think, you know, there is it's something, for ages I didn't talk about my experience, not because I felt ashamed or anything, because I didn't want people to say, oh look, see what she's done, now you can do that too, it doesn't matter, because that is totally wrong. It's, you know, there's so many different factors, and I really resist the kind of binary oppositions of whether it's nature, nurture, success, failure, defeated, victorious, all of those things. There's this whole spectrum around that whole spectrum of experiences and ways of coping and sets of circumstances that can make it so different. So I know somebody that was in one of the homes that I was in more or less the same time, and our paths sort of went like that, and then they've come back together again. And he had one of those kind of stories that I'm not going to go into, but you know, you could say on the surface that we had similar experiences, but actually the detail is so different, you can't extrapolate from it.
So just in concluding, I'll just add one thought about the question of stories being used for good and ill, and say that anybody who has the intent to use something for ill doesn't need your stories to do that.
Exactly.
They're going to do that anyway, and you never know how what you tell is going to resonate. There are people who've had the kind of life that you described, Lola, in the beginning, where it looked like the mother and the dad and the dog and all the rest, and that the person listening has had a much more stressful life and thinks that person will never understand. So you never really know, and therefore the more honest and in touch you are with yourselves, the better the chances are that you'll be able to use that for good, regardless of how other people do it. But I think you will agree with me that these are 4 extraordinary individuals who took great courage to share with us their stories.